now to answer any further questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Okay, so we are on to our next item, agenda item, which is unfinished business, the rezoning 228 to 246 East Broadway and 180 Kingsway, the Rize Alliance proposal. And at the public hearing, which was held February 27th and 28th, March 1st and 27th, April 4th and 5th, Council concluded the hearing of the public on this rezoning application and referred the discussion and the decision to this Council meeting. And additional written comments and speaker submissions which were received on that last evening of the public hearing, including that which was received within 15 minutes following the closure of the speakers list, were circulated to all Council members on Thursday, April the 12th. Council members who were absent for part of the public hearing may only vote on this matter if they received a summary report, which includes a video recording of the part of the public hearing from which they were absent. So I'm going to check in with the three councillors who missed some of the public hearing to confirm their next steps. Councillor Ball, you were absent on March 27th and April 4th. Have you received a summary report which includes viewing the video recording of the proceedings for each of these dates?
I actually watched the debates and watched all of the speakers on television.
Okay, and do you wish to participate in the discussion and decision for the Rize Alliance application? Okay, and Councillor Reimer, you were absent April 4th and 5th. Have you received a summary report which includes viewing the video recording of the proceedings for each of these dates?
Yeah, I watched the full video recording for both dates, Mayor Robertson.
You watched the full video recording, and do you wish to...
Not as much fun online, let me tell you. More fun to be here.
Pardon me?
Not as much fun to sit at home and watch as it is to be here.
And do you wish to participate in the discussion and decision for the Rize Alliance?
I do.
Okay, and finally, Councillor Stevenson, you were absent March 27th, April 4th, April 5th. Have you received a summary report which includes viewing the video recording of the proceedings for each of these dates?
No.
Okay, so you wish to participate in the discussion and decision? No. Okay, fair enough. So Councillor Stevenson is not participating in the discussion and decision. But we will move to that very discussion and decision. And we'll start with Councillor Louie on the queue.
Are we, Mr. Mayor, are we moving to questions, or are we going straight?
We can start with a round of clarifying questions, one round of questions, and then a motion, debate, and decision on that motion.
I'm prepared to move a motion, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Louie, we'll come back to you then. Councillor Carr, questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have some questions for staff. First of all, I'd like to know which of the public concerns that were raised during the hearings could be addressed in the design phase and which couldn't. I'm going to list them, but I just need a yes, this can be addressed in design phase, or no, that means we have to send it back for redesign. Height. Can it be addressed in the design phase?
Is that mic on now?
Yeah, it's on now.
Okay. Not without affecting your community amenity contribution.
Okay. Density?
Similarly, not without affecting the CAC.
Okay. The design not being iconic as per the plan?
That is part of a development permit process, and we anticipate going through that should you decide to approve the rezoning.
Okay. The lack of permeability in terms of access to the public to public space, etc.
It's, in our estimation, it's too great a change to the development and still deal with the same rezoning. If that is Council's desire, then our suggestion is that we would likely be looking at a different kind of project.
Okay. The treatment of Watson Street as a special street like Molehill, I'm using wording from the plan?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's absolutely part of the development permit process, and we anticipate changes to Watson Street facade.
Okay, some concerns that still remain around the bike lane and the egress and access points in truck traffic, impact on the bike lane?
Yes, that is part of the development permit process and can be dealt with then.
Okay, thank you. I have one other question. Bonus to the developer, in terms of height and density, in exchange for CAC's community and amenity contributions. When did that policy of trading off giving more height and density in exchange for community amenity contributions, either on-site or in cash contributions, can you give me a feeling for the legacy of that? When did that policy come into City Council?
Do you want to take that, Michael?
Well, it's been around for as long as I have been, which is 10 years and longer than that. So I'm not exactly sure when it came in. Mr. McCollum, do you know? Had 80s, 90s. We're kind of guessing. We can get back to you with a policy response, but it's been around for a very long time.
Okay. And are there other ways in which a city can get money for community development other than contributions based on developer receiving bonuses in the form of increased density or height?
Well, not without partnering with higher levels of government. I think if you're looking at finding ways to deliver amenities for a local neighborhood that are not within a capital plan, that is the methodology that Vancouver has used for decades. So.
Okay, other cities?
I can't comment on what their approach is. I do know that I think Vancouver's is fairly progressive in that vein about leveraging those kinds of funds for those sorts of local amenities. That doesn't exist in certain other cities, and I think several of them are envious of the Vancouver system and what we've been able to achieve over the last several decades.
Mr. McClelland?
If I could supplement the response that was given by city staff, I should note that development cost levies are charged for development. That's a system that's much like what other municipalities have in the form of development cost charges, but they're limited to particular types of services. In the case of Vancouver, it's for replacement housing, for childcare, for various types of engineering works. We have those similar charges at the regional level for certain sewer infrastructure and the like. There are other opportunities for negotiation that happen through rezonings, typically in other municipalities in the province. We have a rigor to our community amenity contribution system, which is probably much unlike the others because there's a systematic approach to it. Others, it's much more of a negotiated effort on an individual basis because they typically don't deal with the volume that we have to deal with it. And in the United States, there are various other applications that are used because of the increased powers that municipal governments have versus their Canadian counterparts. So there are other models that are in use in other cities, but we've tried to exercise all the tools that we have available to us under current legislation.
Okay, thank you. And other than the community amenity, so I understand the difference between the development levies and permit levies and the community amenity contributions. But other than those, it is through the public discussion around a capital plan and the public actually acknowledging in terms of funding, and then that gets funded through, obviously, the leverage of taxes on property. That's the other basis for delivering community amenities, correct?
That's correct. In our capital plan, we note that some of the money is borrowed money that we pay back over time for our operating budget. Some of it is collected through our community amenity contributions and through our development cost levies, and those are allocated through our capital budgeting systems. So our capital budget relies on several sources of revenue in addition to taxation, like CACs and DCLs for our capital expenditures.
Mr. Mayor and Council, maybe I can just add, Councillor, the 10-year capital outlook that we presented to Council within the last year, with which we align our 3-year capital plans, it's fundamental that all of these different sources, that as much as possible when we negotiate CACs, that it reflects both the community plans and the ongoing capital outlook of the needs of the city. These things come together, and these negotiations aren't just based on, just a one-off, what somebody thinks might be a good thing. It should all line up with council policy, the 10-year capital plan, and then, the needs of the local community as it relates to those capital needs. So it's as coherent as we can possibly make it.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Councillor Carr. Councillor Meggs, questions?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I want to take this opportunity, I always forget to later, to commend the staff for an enormous amount of work here. I don't know what the outcome will be today, but certainly I have more yellow memos and background information and material than I've ever seen before, and it's been a big job for everybody. But I do want to clarify a couple of points which have already been clarified, but I think it's good to bring them back and refresh them at this stage. So if I understand Ms. Page correctly, a C3A would be routine before the applicant. The C3A zoning existed before the Mount Pleasant plan, and under that zoning, which predated the plan, it was there were routine approvals for buildings as high as 100 feet, and certainly well above the 70 that many people have referenced. And in fact, you could go up to 150 feet under C3A. Is that right?
That is correct. I think a good example that we showed on a number of evenings was the Stella project, which was approved prior to the adoption of the Mount Pleasant Community Plan, and it was approved, I think, in 2004, 2005. It had a 3 FSR and 135-foot height.
So what sort of community amenity contributions are generated by a C3A approval through that stream under the old arrangement?
There isn't any other than your DCLs, which is standard.
So theoretically, in the absence of the plan, we could be at 150 feet and have no community amenity contributions at all.
That's correct.
Okay, so I just want to reference the plan here because many people have talked about it, and obviously the plan is kind of the key document, the core document that we're going to have to reference now since it was adopted in 2010. And it points to this site, and there's been no argument on that score, as a crucial site for the entire neighborhood, because as I read the plan, and this is my question, it does it not mean that, is it not almost the only site where we anticipate significant rezonings that would produce community amenity contributions?
That's correct. We think this is one of the 3 sites identified for higher densities and higher heights beyond C3A. This one in particular is the largest of those 3, where we think that is the site that you will achieve the greatest height and density and the consequence, the greatest CAC that would come from that.
So in the absence of a rezoning, there would be no benefits. There
That's
might
correct,
be height, but no benefits. And as I read the plan, and this is the last part I wanted to clarify, the benefits from the, and this was something I only learned in the last 24 hours reading really carefully because there's a lot of documentation here, but it was the community identified housing affordability and cultural amenities as 2 key priorities. But as I read it, this rezoning, if there was one approved by council, would produce amenity contributions, cultural ones, for the area north of Broadway in that triangle in the heart and so on. Am I right about that? That it seems to me it was contemplated that some of those community amenity contributions would not be on the site, they would be community located.
Oh, that's correct. I think part of the goal embedded within the plan is actually to preserve part of their historic sites, particularly that triangular, which is north, which will require transferring heritage density in order to retain those buildings as is. That's the notion of having a benefit in one site and generate it onto another. So I think the whole notion of looking at the area in totality is part of embedded within the plan. So if there's a cultural amenity that's generated on this site but not realized on this site, we don't find that incongruent with how the plan was developed.
Yeah, well, there were a number of speakers who expressed disappointment that there weren't, cultural amenities on the site. But in my rereading of the plan, and I think you've confirmed my understanding, it was contemplated in the plan that those benefits might flow, in fact, north of Broadway, where we would use it for heritage and other cultural purposes, which remain to be clarified. I think that's all my questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Meigs. Councillor Deal.
Yes, thank you very much. Councillor Meigs already asked a clarifying question around the allowable height under current zoning. But we did hear an awful lot from people about a lot of concern about the actual height of the tower, and a lot of people asked what it would look like if you took the whole thing down to a shorter form. But people seem to often said, we're okay with the density, we don't like the height. So what would it look like if we took that same density and pushed it all down? What would that square block look like? About how tall might that be?
Our estimation is it would likely be somewhere between 10 and 12 stories, probably around 145 feet. It would be a continuous street wall around the perimeter of the property. And by doing that, it has certain consequences. It becomes a double-loaded corridor as opposed to a single-loaded corridor, which means that center interior courtyard is made smaller. It becomes more like a light well as opposed to an interior courtyard, and that has absolute consequences onto the livability of the units that face the courtyard and the ability to have urban agriculture. Because of the height of that street wall, you would end up with the courtyard in shadow for most of the day. It would also increase shadowing on the public realm around the project because of the height of the property as well. And the corners of that mass become almost unusable. It creates very deep units with no windows, so you end up with an awkward situation of trying to get that density into that street wall in a way that doesn't really make sense.
So 10 to 12 stories, continuous long street walls all the way around the whole block.
That's correct.
And no permeability.
That's correct.
At that point, and potentially no amenities beyond the DCLs at that point.
That's correct.
So that's a potential alternative. From the pedestrian realm point of view, I mean, I'm really concerned about the pedestrian realm, and I'm always curious about the things like how far back does it need to be set, how tall is a podium or a building before you start to notice the differences from the street level. So what would the difference be from the pedestrian point of view between what's being proposed and that more solid, shorter block that you've just described?
Well, what you would experience on the street level is more shadowing, which has a big impact on the livability of a street. So that's the first impact of that as well. And I think you end up with a project where you lose a little bit of the scale of the block. For instance, without the undulation of a smaller podium in the tower. So you lose the light, you lose the ability to scale the block down. One of the proposals or aspects about this rezoning is that you have the ability to have different kinds of facades as you move around the property. When you have a uniform street wall, you lose that sense, in essence, of what it is. So there's an urban design consequence as well as a public realm consequence.
Okay, thank you. And then my final question is in response to some concerns that have been voiced and in fact are being displayed upstairs. Have the engineers looked at the truck turning radiuses, and is it possible?
Yes, they have, and yes, it is.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Deal. Councillor Ball.
Yes, just as a quick follow-on to Councillor Deal. Having lived in New York where there's many, many high buildings, and the blocks that people are crazy about are the ones where the street access is friendly. And I just want to confirm here that in the design process, that's one of the elements that you look at, that the street presence is friendly, because that's what we're most involved with as pedestrians rather than how tall it is. So I just want to make sure that that is one of the things that the design process works toward.
And that's correct. The development permit process is where we're going to be looking at the scale of those elements that are within pedestrian range, basically, is what it is. So it's the size and scale of storefronts. It's the degree of rhythm on the facade. It's the relationship of solid to void. It's all those things with respect to materials and color and scale that really need the development permit process to fine-tune. So.
One other thing, the cultural amenity, which is the studios, the artist studios, which are so desperately needed in the city. Can you see any other way that they could be provided, or that much money could be made accessible in that neighborhood in the next 10 years in terms of development?
Well, I think we need cultural services here to really say what's within their future in actually securing it. But we do know there is a tremendous shortage of production space within the city. This is one of those ways of trying to leverage funds to produce it. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ball. I have a couple of questions. You have more questions?
So you go first.
My questions are on 10th and Watson, both Watson the special status, 10th as a very important bike route, and there's some solutions proposed to deal with traffic, and particularly the truck loading and impact on Watson. I'm curious, we had some questions and back and forth on this through the public hearing around how other sites, very congested sites around the city, deal with truck loading and unloading when they're in a difficult spot, and whether there are measures we can implement here to reduce the trucks being on site when it's rush hour and there's bikes around, when there's a lot of pedestrians moving around from the bus stop there, the Beeline stop, Watson Street. What kind of solutions are possible there?
Thank you.
Yes, it is a challenge, and Watson is a busy street, and will be busy with the various functions that are required there. It's certainly something that is not unusual compared to other projects in the city. Our preference is to take loading not on the busy arterial streets, in this case Broadway or Kingsway or 10th Avenue, which is the bikeway. And so Watson is the one where we have focused those activities. We are going to look, as we go through the design phase, at different types of treatment and ways that Watson can be designed so that it's consistent with the Mount Pleasant plan that talked about enhancing pedestrian connection through the laneways and some of the side streets. There will be a truck management or a loading management plan for the facility, and that will look at ways to minimize the conflicts. And also some of the changes in the street grid there, we're looking at making 10th Avenue a one-way street. That reduces in half essentially the number of conflict points between vehicles turning, pedestrians and bikes going through. So we're looking at a number of different ways of not only enhancing the pedestrian realm and pedestrian connections, but also to minimize conflicts.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Louie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of questions just to confirm what I understand the project to be. First of all, that the proposal is consistent with the Mount Pleasant Community Plan. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that this site that is being proposed to be developed is one of 3 sites for higher densities, and that higher built forms, meaning tower and mid-rise, were contemplated for this site.
That's correct.
And the other 2 sites as well.
That's correct.
But only in these 3 sites would be the tower forms be allowed according to the plan. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So it would not set a precedent for the area. Is that correct?
That's correct. The plan is quite clear as to where they think these opportunities lie, and they've been specific about these 3 locations.
Okay, just go over for me once again the staff recommendation on movement of cultural amenity off-site. Why was that?
Well, as we explained earlier, the project originally contained 9,200 square feet of artist production space. And the late fall of last year, we started looking at the cost to generate that 9,200 square feet, and it turned into $4.5 million. And when staff looked at that assessment, they determined that that amount of money could be leveraged in the way that the city is able to do this with other fundings to produce even a greater amount of cultural space, which could be not only artist production space, but other things as well that are needed within the community. It was at that point that staff determined that the neighborhood would be better served by asking for a cash CAC as opposed to a non-site amenity.
Okay. Further to Councillor Meg's question, under a C3A scenario where they would come in without a rezoning, I understand what you said was that there would be no community amenity contribution being offered to the city.
That's correct.
It's also true then that because it's not a rezoning, there would be no public art contribution as well.
That's correct. Yeah.
Because and currently the proposal is about $580 some odd thousand dollars.
Yes, I can get you the exact number here. It's $538,000.
538. So that's the amount. Okay. Those are my questions, Mr. Mayor, and I'm prepared to move a motion. Mr. Mayor, I will move the approval of this project, but I will add a number of additions in terms of conditions to the project. And I distributed to the clerk, and I'll just go through them quickly. You'll see that under A condition, I've added a number 11, which is prior to issuance of a development permit. The applicant is to work with staff to improve the aesthetics of the building, and particularly with the bulky appearance of the podium, given specific consideration to matters including but not limited to the following. On the Broadway elevation, the breaking up of the large monolithic horizontal element that is presently located above the pedestrian colonnade in order to reduce the scale and mass. Strengthen the walkability along the Broadway frontage by adding a secondary order of building elements within the colonnade and at the street level, sidewalk level, and at the pedestrian scale. On all facades, refinement and exterior wall treatments to create elements of smaller scale and expression. Additional measures to enhance the pedestrian realm, particularly along Watson Street, as set out in the Mount Pleasant Community Plan. After you move through the recommendations of conditions of D, add conditions E, F, G, and H, that Director of Finance be directed to place the total CAC proceeds in a specific reserve to be allocated to public amenities within Mount Pleasant. That staff report to Council within 6 months of this date with a clear strategy on the use of the CACs designated for cultural amenities of up to $4.5 million in the form of capital contribution and or operating endowment in order to bring online community-based artist production space in Mount Pleasant. That staff report back within 6 months on the proposed strategy to utilize the $1.75 million designated for affordable housing for contribution to the availability of affordable housing in Mount Pleasant. That staff consult with Mount Pleasant Community Liaison Group on the implementation strategy of the CACs. And if I might just speak to each one of these. First, what we heard from the public was that they were not opposed to density, but were concerned with the form of development. And I would say that I personally would share some of those concerns, that the design of this building must be respectful to the neighborhood in terms of its design, and that it should meet the test of what Mount Pleasant is. And so this additional conditional language is meant to guide the DP process so that we, in fact, can break up some of that blockiness, that fortress style, that colossal feeling that we currently see within the current design. The particular emphasis should be made to the street fronts where the CRUs aren't required to conform to a certain standard format. Recently there was a lot of discussion on East is East being looking outside the box and wanting to try to have an expression at the street front. And I think Council is giving an instruction that we would like something similar in terms of flexibility so that we don't have this single facade template for the entire site. The height is some concern, but also the balance of the CAC contribution and the height needs to be considered. We would like to preserve the CACs, but look at the opportunity to reduce the height in some fashion. It may be nominal, but certainly some work in the floor-to-height ceiling ratios of each of the floors may yield some minor adjustments and reduction in the total height of the development. What we heard from the community is that they were concerned about the process and allocation of CACs, that they wouldn't stay within Mount Pleasant, wouldn't be allocated, and wouldn't be done in a timely fashion. And so the additional conditions set out that this would be in a specific reserve fund, and this is direction to the Director of Finance for amenities within Mount Pleasant. That again, very clear that the cultural amenities we would make a best effort basis to report back within 6 months on the $4.5 million contribution to the artist space within Mount Pleasant. Again, same for the Affordable Housing Fund, and that in addition to these conditions, that we expect that we would have a discussion and consult with the Mount Pleasant Community Liaison Group on the implementation strategy for the CACs as well. This is, Mr. Mayor, has not been an easy process, but given the fact that this is a significant site in Mount Pleasant, that it was identified in the plan, that it is a transit-oriented development that meets, I think, the tests of today and into the future, and is meant to serve not just today's community, but many generations to come, hopefully, that I am prepared to support this development. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Louis. So, Councillor Carr to the motion.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've just sent to the clerk a motion to refer. And my motion is to refer this back to staff to work with the developer and in cooperation with the local community to resubmit a project that addresses the community's issues regarding height, density, permeability, iconic design, impacts on the bike lane, and the treatment of Watson Street. I agree that this has been a long process, and there's been an immense amount of effort on the part of staff and the applicant, and a particular. I do not think that we should be asking the community to give up on their vision that they believe, and I believe justifiably have interpreted in their community plan for this project for $6.5 million in community land. I think that the issues of affordable housing are moot in the sense that there is not justification from what I have heard in terms of height equating with affordability. I think we need to address that. I think that we need to address the whole issue of how we fund community amenities, as I mentioned earlier in a question, and that can be something that we can pursue later. But I think the community needs to be engaged with the developer in terms of whether they're willing to trade off community amenities for some very different kind of design that meets their needs. And finally, I want to counter my colleague, Councillor Louis' statement that this proposal is in line with the community plan. And I understand that there's a difference of opinion, but I absolutely believe that the community is justified in interpreting.
Yeah, why don't we call a short recess?
Okay,
seeing as we have a number of council members have had to step out.
Yes,
we'll just take a brief recess.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to call our council meeting back to order. Just ask people to take their seats, and Councillor Stevenson is rounding up Councillor Jang. So we've had our lunch break. So just a quick check-in. It's 12:20 now. Council will need a motion to extend beyond 1 o'clock. So we would need to suspend the procedure bylaw to extend beyond 1 o'clock, and we could go till 1:45, and council take a short break, and then convene in committee for this afternoon's committee agenda. So, Councillor Louis, you're going to move suspending the procedure bylaw to extend the meeting to 1:45 council meeting. Okay, and all those in we need to. We in committee? We're not in committee. All those in favor of adjusting our timelines accordingly? And any opposed? And that carries. So we will go for about an hour and a half and get as much council business as we can.
Mr. Mayor, before we proceed, I just want to inform you that I will not pull item number 4, and that's no longer to be held. And if there's staff here for item number 4, then they can be released to go about their other city business, and if there's others that would like to be
that's good to know. So administrative report 4, and
I'll quickly move that if you'd like. Just move the adoption of it.
Move adoption of 4. Okay. And any debate on that? All those in favor, administrative report 4. Any opposed? And that carries. So we, in terms of the rest of our council agenda, maybe we'll check in at 1 o'clock, and if there are other items that we may need to refer till tomorrow's council meeting, we can do it at that point, and staff who might be waiting for those items can return to their regular business. So we're going to reconvene here, pick up where we were on our unfinished business item, the Rize Alliance. Councillor Carr was midstream moving a referral motion. I think you had about a minute and a half left speaking to your referral. I've started an amendment queue on that, so we have a few people on that. And Councillor Carr, you have the floor again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe I was in the middle of talking about whether or not this proposal fits with the Mount Pleasant Community Plan. And my conclusion is that I disagree with Councillor Louie and with staff on this, and I agree with the majority of residents, especially local residents, who have said that it doesn't. Especially on the issues of height, permeability, the design, the bike lane, the special treatment of Watson Street. But I was most compelled by the final presentation in our days of public hearing. And that final presentation, to remind you, was one in which we saw the exact wording in the plan that referred to 3 sites. And talked about those sites as being places within the Mount Pleasant community where there would be increased or could be increased height and density. And in 2 of them, there was very specific wording about increasing the height in those 2 spots, not in this one. And in that description of increased height and density, it said to medium and high rise. And I believe that it is an entirely reasonable assumption that the community has made to say that the 2 that specified high-rise were intended for high-rise, and the 3rd site, which is the subject of this hearing, is medium-rise. So in voting on this referral, I'd like you to remember that height has always been the primary issue, and it is embedded in many places in this community plan. So consider that this is an iconic decision and that we've been asked by the community to get it right. I believe that we need to refer so that they can go back and work with the developer and our staff to get it right and fit with the plan. Thank you.
So we have a motion to refer on the floor, and Councillor Louie speaking to that referral motion.
Mr. Mayor, a question to staff, perhaps, or to the clerk. I don't believe the motion is in order, as this is essentially a referral of the matter entirely over to the developer and staff. The developer has made a proposal to us on whether or not to accept and our choice, I think, is either to substantially accept or defeat the proposal. And we can't bind, as a council, the developer nor the community to consult or not to consult. And so at this point in time, I don't believe that it is in order. I think the choices are either to approve for the project or defeat the project. And if the developer decides to then engage further and have a secondary proposal, then of course that is their choice. But a referral, I don't think is in order in this case.
Thanks, Councillor Louie. Let me just talk with the clerk here on this matter. One moment, please. Okay, after some consulting with the clerk and city manager of this, I am going to rule the referral motion out of order, given that we are charged with either accepting or denying the application in a public hearing. We can't tell the developer or the community what to do in this situation. Our only stipulations in terms of conditions can be on the development permit process that ensues. So with regards to the application, we need to make a decision, yes or no, and conditions can go along as some have been proposed by Councillor Louis for the process that would ensue. So that's, we'll go back to the main queue. Councillor Carr, you've, I think, expressed your remarks in the full time. And so I'm gonna go to our next speaker to that main motion. Councillor Meggs is next.
Well, thanks, Mr. Mayor. This has been a very long and difficult hearing, and I've been going back repeatedly, as I indicated earlier in my questions, to the plan. And, you know, the plan came at a time when Mount Pleasant was actually stagnating, and as the plan makes it clear, in the absence of some new energy and some new direction from the community, population was dropping, the number of children in the neighborhood was going down, and so action needed to be taken. And some of the priorities, I gather there's some people present who opposed a new plan, Mr. Mayor, but that was certainly not the view of those who came the night that it was approved. There were 6 speakers the night that we adopted the plan, and all were in favor that night. So I looked at the minutes yesterday. But certainly that kind of renewal and community control was a very important part of the discussions, and affordable housing, the development of transit-oriented density at Broadway and Main, and commitments for new amenities for culture are unarguably and indisputably were key aspects of the plan that was finally adopted. This is very close to a lot of the speakers, as Councillor Carr did. I'm sure everybody did. And I want to refer to a few of them by name because they were people from the community who I hadn't heard from before in these meetings, and I thought that they made important comments about their opposition. Mandeep Johal was very against the project, I think it's fair to say. She demanded affordability. She was opposed to the height, but she said the fundamental problem is the height. Caitlin Jones of the Western Front opposed the project because of the loss of 9,200 feet of art space, and talked very compellingly about all the arts and community amenities that are flowing from the cultural activities in that neighborhood. Annabelle Vaughn gave a powerful speech, challenged us to eliminate the tower, to put all the density at ground level and above that, and to eliminate the parking, and to resolve the problems that way. Stuart Alcock, who I know to be a long-time activist and resident in the neighborhood, supported what Annabelle had to say. He agreed with her. He said he approves of density, but not the form of this project. And he challenged us to find amenities like children's space, green space, parking, or more parks, and so on. So I took away from those comments that people were focusing on the plan, the height, and the amenities, particularly the affordability and cultural work. And I was very struck by the repeated statements from staff that we would be at 150 feet under C3A under any scenario. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time because it's been gone through quite a bit. I completely disagree with Councillor Carr about the plan and the way it reads, and I've gone back over it many, many times. The plan talks about an iconic landmark building at this site. It talks about high-rises at selected sites. It talks about the need to pursue additional height and density at select locations. It talks about large scale at Kingsway and Broadway. This is one of 3 sites, only 3 in the entire plan that would produce CACs, including what the community has asked for so much, which is affordable housing and cultural improvements. And so we think about the Lee Building, a 20th century response to the challenges of Mount Pleasant, at a transit intersection, an iconic building, denser than this project, a mixed-use one. No pretense made by the owners of the Lee Building at affordability. It was luxury apartment buildings in those days, and very, very much taller than everything that was around it. And I have to ask myself, what is the correct response to the same challenges in the 21st century? And can I find one that meets the concerns about height and frustrations with height in the neighborhood that will actually deliver everything else the neighborhood says it wants? And I can't, Mr. Mayor, and that's why I'm going to support Councillor Louis' motion here today. We have seen many, many sacrifices on the way to this proposal, from what was first kicked around at 30 stories, then came down to about some 20, and it's now at 19. During that period, all the rental housing disappeared, a key affordability feature. We saw cultural amenities go down. These were all repeated efforts through this process on the part of the developers and staff to respond to what the plan also said, which was that height was a key sensitivity. And during this process, the mid-rise section of the building rose 30 feet higher as people tried to manage down the height of this tower. I would say probably reducing its landmark aspects and so on. And so what we have now is a compromise between the pressures of the community and the demands of the plan that produce transit-oriented density, which we haven't heard anyone oppose. It produces a measure of affordability, but less than I would have liked, to be honest, and some cultural amenities which will be landed consistent with the plan in that neighborhood. Now, the developer's work is not done. I think the design needs improvement. There's been a lot of frustration across the board expressed at it not being iconic enough, whatever the hell iconic means anymore. And Watson Street certainly needs some improvement because it's hard to square the special site aspects of the plan with the truck movement, so I think they're possible. I'm running out of time, so I just want to end on this note, Mr. Mayor. The questions facing the Council today and what people have said in the media is what is the meaning of such a decision if it's approved? And I think it means that the 21st century will not look like 20th century Vancouver. We have to take that into account. The plans must respect citywide needs, but also neighborhood planning has to be respected, and I think we try to do that here. And finally, I think we have to come to grips with the fact that towers are not a magic bullet, but they're not the work of the devil either. And we'll have to work with various forums as we move forward in our community plans to find the right answers for neighborhoods. But I think today, this is the right answer before us.
Thanks, Councillor Meggs. Councillor Jang is next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I too rise in support of the motion and amendments made by Councillor Louis, and I won't reiterate very eloquent reasons that Councillor Meggs gave. I have to rewrite my speech kind of because I said I had these things down as well. But what really sealed it for me, in the sense, we heard the issues about height, and with the height comes the community amenity contributions, which is a substantial amount of money for arts as well as affordable housing. And then we heard people say, well, we need to reduce the height. It's not the density and all that kind of stuff. Just reduce the height. And so then we get a squat building, as we heard today. And then but what would the impact of that be? Well, the actual living units in the building would be what? They'd be not very livable. They'd be dark. They would be, deep and dark, no light. The courtyard would be cut. You couldn't even do anything in the courtyard because it'd be in shadow all the time. So it made me reflect upon what is a neighborhood? What makes a neighborhood? Is it buildings or is it people? And certainly I came down on the side of people. It's because, I was really taken aback. I was really, really moved by the gentleman who came with his two boys. And he said, I'm a restarter. I'm a single dad and I can't find a place to live. And that, for me, it said to me very clearly, we need housing in Mount Pleasant. He said it very clearly. And then to bolster that, a number of other speakers said, I can't find housing in Mount Pleasant. I just simply can't find it. In fact, some had said it's cheaper to live downtown than it is in Mount Pleasant. So there's something wrong. So clearly he says to me, we need some housing. So I'm very pleased to support this. The many issues raised about the CACs, the art spaces, and the look of the building, I think are covered very well under Councillor Louis' amendments, and I'm very happy to support it because it's people that make a neighborhood, not the buildings themselves. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Jang. Councillor Deal.
Yes, thank you very much. I too stand in support of Councillor Louis' motion, and I appreciate the changes he made to the original motion. This has been a very difficult one, so I'll just go through a couple of reasons. Most have been very well articulated. I won't take much time. But I was very interested in the block form. I was very interested in the idea of a mid-rise full block form. I like that kind of building. I think they're a really important part of the fabric of the city where they exist. But when I found out that doing that would create a potentially less amenable pedestrian realm, I'm really interested in what it's going to be like for the way most people interact with this building, which is going to be traveling around it at ground level. Some people will have a direct impact on the view. We know that. That's what happens with new buildings, and it's never a great thing for those people. But most people will interact with this building as they travel around at the ground level. So what's that going to look like? What's that going to feel like? Well, it's going to get darker if we go to that block form. It's not going to get any more permeable as a site, which I'm sorry we don't have permeability. And it's not going to improve the pedestrian realm. So that argument started to not feel as strong to me, that that's the alternative that was going to be better for the neighborhood. And then in addition to that, we might lose the artist space. And the artist space to me is hugely important. Hugely important. We have seen a real crisis in artist affordability and artist space in the city, and crisis is not an overstatement. Our own staff use that, and staff aren't prone to using terms like crisis. And we know that we're challenged with the spaces that we're putting in new buildings. They're unaffordable for a lot of artists because artists' incomes are some of the lowest working incomes in the city. So what do? In this case, we're getting money into a fund, and I think this is something we're going to see more of in the future. We have to look at this very closely because what this means is that we can now get space in buildings that are older, and older buildings are always more affordable. And Mount Pleasant has some great older buildings which would make great artist spaces. And this fund will allow us to go and create more space more affordably in other buildings in Mount Pleasant. I'm very pleased that we put a timeline on this. That was crucial to me, and that we're going to get community input into that. Those things are very important to me. So because the pedestrian realm was not being improved by squishing the building down, because we're getting the artist spaces, and because it's transit-oriented density, most people who came and spoke to us said they were okay with the density, but the density doesn't create something that's airy and small at the ground level. It just doesn't on that site. It's a challenging small site. So because of those three major reasons, that we need transit-oriented density, that the artist space in affordable older buildings in the neighborhood, more artist space, is very important to me, and because I wasn't convinced that squishing it down all shorter into that block form would create a more enjoyable experience at the ground level for the people who interact with it that way every day. Therefore, I'm happy to support this, and again, I'm looking forward to the design alterations that we hopefully will see to break up those long faces. I agree that more work needs to be done there, and hopefully this direction will give the developer the information they need to make some changes.
Thank you, Councillor Deal. Councillor Reimers next.
Thanks, Mayor Robertson. Well, this has been a very challenging decision, I think, for all of us, but I can only speak to my own experience. Noting, of course, that I spent part of it in the hospital, so it will always stick in my mind as a memorable experience. It did give me an opportunity, however, to read a lot. I think I've read this plan so many times I can actually quote parts of it, chapter and verse. Unlike previous plans, I've had to sit through public hearings where people debate what seniors meant in the context of a plan, what mid-rise meant, and I wasn't there for those plans, so I don't really know other than what was left on paper. But this one, I was here in November 2010 when this plan was passed. I remember the speakers, and just to make sure I didn't forget anything, I went back and rewatched the tape several times, actually, to make sure that I was remembering the plan properly, because I think in a situation like this where you have a broad spectrum of opinions about what to do moving forward, the plan should always provide guidance, but most especially in this case. In my opinion, both from my memory of it, from rewatching the tapes of the plan, and from reading the plan, the focal point of it is that future development will need, and I quote from page 23, to demonstrate how to reach an optimal balance of public benefits, site improvements, and urban design objectives with higher densities in low, medium, and on selected sites, high-rise forms of development. So the issue before me is whether or not this is the optimal balance that can be reached. In my opinion, it is. It has been a process that has been going on since 2008, interrupted somewhat by the plan, more intensively over the last, I guess, for a year and a half now. And well, there's many things I would love for this site. I guess if I owned it and had all the money in the world, I don't own it, and I don't have all the money in the world, and my job here is to try and honor the plan. Regardless of what you think of the concept of public benefits being generated by higher densities, there's no question that this plan absolutely anticipated that this site would do that. So the question before me is whether it has generated enough, and whether or not the issues around urban design are achieving that optimal balance. I would say on the issues of benefits, I have learned a lot during the course of the 150 some odd speakers about the politics of putting things on-site versus off-site. I think it would have been easier for people to see that benefit if it were on-site, but I don't believe as a decision maker that I can pander to that, knowing that we could get so much more for the community off-site. So I stand by that decision, but I think the concept of who decides is quite paramount, and I'm pleased to see Councillor Louie adding in the amendments around bringing it back to Council, and particularly with consultation from the community liaison group before it comes back to Council. I would say also that the issues around Watson Street and the bikeway were quite paramount in my mind. They play heavily in the plan. And given the constraints of the site, very difficult to treat well, but I note in the amended recommendations that Councillor Louis has put forward, there's further attempts to make those better. And the last thing I'll say, which I sort of hesitate on because I have no formal training in this, but certainly the speakers who I respect a great deal, there's a lot of time that went into the submissions on this, not just at public hearing, but over the course of the last 4 years, either through developing the plan or through specific inputs at public hearings. My layperson's opinion is that the building is ugly. It's ugly. I look at it and I go, it doesn't work for me. Having said that, I have looked at other ways that one could treat the existing zoning density if it was done under existing zoning. I look at this. I look at all sorts of things, and I think my layperson's head says ugly, but if you could turn the large monolithic horizontal element, as Councillor Louis dubbed it, into something that strengthens walkabilities and creates more diversity in the pedestrian realm, that would alleviate a lot of my concerns with it. So in the design and development permit phase, if it should pass here today, I very much hope that those comments are well heard by staff and by the members who advise on the development and design. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Reimer. Councillor Affleck.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This also was very difficult for me. I voted against this coming to public hearing because I sensed there was a lot of anger in the community, and I think when it comes to public hearing, we should have a little bit further along than I sensed at that meeting where I voted against it coming, and the rest of the council, except for one or two of us, voted against it going to public hearing at that point. We heard a lot of speakers. We heard a lot of different issues. There were two that resonated for me, really, that I worry about. One is the CACs. I think the city is getting addicted to cash CACs. I worry that, I think we see developments happening that don't get cash, and we see some really, and some we'll be seeing today, that are taking and creating artist space or whatever space because they're forced to be creative and find ways to use those CACs in a way instead of just getting cash that will be used for whatever. The other issue is the height and the design of the building. I disagree. I think the community plan is ambiguous. I think that it's not clear in what is supposed to be in that space. And that is really challenging for, I think, all of us, certainly for me. It doesn't say tower. It says, these built. I mean, it doesn't say tower. It doesn't say that. So that's challenging. But then there's a picture that showed us it looks like a tower. So, that concerned me as well. And so those two areas were very worrying to me. But today we're here to make a decision, and Councillor Carr's attempt at a separate side there was, one way to potentially extend this whole decision-making process. But we have to make a decision today, and it's either yes or no. And I'm afraid I have to support this motion, even though it's painful for me in some ways, because I feel like we've let the community down. But I do believe, and I feel Councillor Louis' additions to the motion are strong and will help the process quite a lot, especially specifically related to the CACs and some specific parts of it. I appreciate those additions. And I do think the developer is really clearly, having seen them here every night during the public hearings, is clearly attuned to the community. I think they will listen to you, and I think we have to. I think that the design of the building is a long way to go, and I think that perhaps they provided us with too much information about the design at this stage that we got sort of aside on that. We sort of got led astray a little bit by the looks of what they gave us, when it's a long way to go before we know what actually every little bit will look like. So I'm going to support the motion and Councillor Louis' changes to that motion, additions to those motions, but I do it challenged for sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Affleck. I have Councillor Carr on here. You've spoken to this. You can ask questions at this point if they're needed for you to make your mind up, although you have spoken your mind very clearly in your 5 minutes. Did you have another question?
Mr. Mayor, I believe that I spoke to my referral motion. Although you ruled my referral motion out of order, I was speaking to the need to refer. If that referral motion had been in order, we would have gone through, had a vote on it, and I would have had the opportunity to speak to the motion itself. I believe I'm still in a position to be able to speak to the motion itself.
Yeah, your referral motion was ruled out of order. You used the beginning, I think, preamble was largely content related to the overall situation. So I'll respect your request to have some further time to speak to this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm rising to speak against the motion. I don't believe it fits with the plan, and I will quote from our staff report that there was opportunities in the plan to consider some high-rise as well as mid-rise development in some specific locations, and then listed 3 locations. I really believe that the community's interpretation is justified and right on this, and I will stand with the community in their interpretation of the fact that this proposal does not meet the plan in its spirit and its intent. I think it's really important that we get development right in this city. I think that is the issue that we are facing as a council, how we accommodate growth, how we accommodate density. I'm very compelled by so many of the presentations made by individuals to us with lots of research about getting development right. They really gave us information, concrete information about how you don't need to go with high rises. You can go with medium level density development and accommodate growth in a way that still fits in with neighborhoods and is in fact greener. They gave us incredible advice around how to get the process of consultation right and how to improve upon it. The developer going first to the community and working things out before even going to staff. I think we need to listen to those, and we need to put them into future motions and changes to policy and programs at the council level. I really want to point out that I asked many questions, as I know you listened to, around affordability and whether high-rises deliver affordability. I'm clear that that high-rise development reduces costs, but there's no clarity that those costs are passed on and increase affordability. I don't think that we should assume that this project is going to deliver affordable housing. More housing, yes, not necessarily affordable housing. I also finally just want to say that I don't think that we should, again, offer $6.5 million in community amenities to try and entice members of our community to give up on their vision and their plan. And so regrettably, I will be voting no against this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Tang.
Jill, and also thanks to everyone participating in this application and this public hearing process. And I do sympathize with the genuine feelings from the neighbors speaking against this project. And in the beginning, I was not very much impressed by the design either. But understanding that the design is just the beginning of a long process to make the building more charming and in tune with the neighborhood, and also other reasons such as CAC and as stated in the staff reports, and with the new amendment put in by Councillor Louis. Like item E, the total CAC proceeds in a specific reserves to be allocated to public amenities within the Mount Pleasant community. And like H, that staff consult with Mount Pleasant Community Liaison Group on the implementation strategy on the CACs. And an additional condition 11, which has to deal with the design to improve the look and the feel of the building. So in balance, I would be in support of the motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Tang. And I don't have other speakers. Councillor Louis can close. I'll add my comments. I am in support of the motion, although it's a tough call, and this has been a long and challenging process. Years of work for the proponents and the community and our staff. And I do want to recognize the amount of change that's been made from the outset here. There have been a lot of good ideas brought forward, a lot of passionate thoughts expressed that have completely changed what this looked like initially to a development that I think will make a positive difference in Mount Pleasant and certainly for the city. First and foremost, respecting the community plan is a must. And that means respecting all the work that went into that plan and identified this as a special site. And there's various interpretations of that. Council, I think, needs to weigh staff's very clear recommendation, particularly those who worked closely on the plan, with whether or not this application responds to that plan. And I agree that it does on further scrutiny. I hope that in future community plans there is as robust an engagement as what was triggered here with this proposal. Is we need people involved in the plans, the development of community plans, to ensure that we are clear. Council has guidance from communities as to what they want to see going forward. So it is unfortunate when there's not crystal clear guidelines around this, but based on what we've been advised on, based on what we read in the plan that was well supported by the community and then by council, we need to respect that community plan. Transit-oriented development is a top priority for this council, a key piece for our city right now, and this site sits on one of the busiest transit nodes in BC. Not only does that mean sustainable transportation using the transit system and the bike network, but we will likely see real change in the type of transportation that's available there with the Broadway Rapid Transit line station that should be at Main and Broadway. So in the century to come, I think we'll see this area continue to change, and the need to think long term and ensure that we have lots of housing on the transit node is really crucial. I agree there have been real challenges with the design. The combination of height and design certainly rubbed many residents the wrong way, and we heard eloquent denunciations of the form and the design. We had some who liked it. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and this is not an easy site to work with. We faced with the alternative under C3A of a large block filling the entire lot. That isn't a compelling alternative. So I think in this case it's weighing off the potential improvements that can be made to the design, and I agree with the additional points that Councillor Louis put forward to address design, to address the pedestrian realm in particular and Watson Street, and ensure that everything's done in the development permit phase to improve the look and feel of this building. And we had lots of good feedback on that from the community. There are significant community benefits that accrue to this, and that wouldn't happen if we were to not consider this and not approve it and have it come back under current zoning. There would not be any benefits that would accrue. The affordable housing is significant. The staff is saying 25 units of affordable housing could be realized through that contribution. The art space, I think, can be far more significant off-site, and I know there's real interest around this council table to ensure that we deliver significant arts benefits through that contribution. And there's a lot more leverage doing that, looking beyond just the specific site, but in walking distance of central Mount Pleasant there. So I think there's been a lot of great words spoken to this. There's clearly a real interest in shaping the future of Mount Pleasant and the community being more involved in that. We have 2 other sites that are of same significance, and we expect there to be a robust process around that that takes into account all that's been said in this public hearing. And that said, those are the 3, and the rest of the development that will happen in Mount Pleasant will be much lower and more modest scale. So that's my perspective on this. I don't make this decision lightly, respecting so many people that did come out expressing their opinions. Thanks for all the hard work. And we still have a development permit phase of this for people to be involved in and make sure that we get the best possible building and addition to the community that we can through this. So, Councillor Louie, your closing comments.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I'd like to thank all the people that came out and spoke to us, those that came out and spoke against the project and those that came and spoke for the project. I think it was important that Council hear all your voices, and I think as a result of hearing that diversity of voice, both for and against, that certainly Council is now engaged and made some changes to what the staff recommendation was. And in the end, there's been an improvement, in my opinion, from what was being proposed from the applicant. I want to say that in this instance, this community plan is not an old plan. Oftentimes, having been on Council now for 10 years, that some of the community plans are quite dated. This plan, as Councillor Reimer stated, was adopted by Council in November 18th, 2010, and it was supported by the community. And so when we look at that plan, it is a fresh plan. And when we look more specifically at the language, and we can obviously choose to interpret the language as we see fit, but it's clear to me at least that under 3.4, large development sites, it says, as a general guideline for the whole neighborhood, the community supports greater use of infill opportunities over high-rise development, but the Mount Pleasant community also sees opportunity for some high-rise as well as mid-rise developments in some specific locations. And those are the three. Now, it goes on to describe why. Why are those three sites important to allow for high-rise and mid-rise? And it goes on to describe open space and public benefits and cultural amenities, affordable housing, childcare, improved pedestrian realm, amongst other things, and pursue additional height and density in these select locations. And so it was envisioned as part of the plan to pursue additional height and density in these locations for these very specific reasons. In fact, the plan, and it is just an illustration, but the plan does have an illustration that describes how a development may look in this site. And I'd have to say that it's amazing that this development proposal seems to almost exactly fit what is before us today and in the plan itself. Goes on further to say under large sites 5.1 and describes specifically on this development proposal site. Supports the design of an iconic landmark building when granting permission for higher buildings. So it does very specifically talk about both the reason, the allowance, and more specifically of higher buildings on this specific site. And to say that it doesn't, it seems that your interpretation, well, obviously different than mine, but doesn't read as the plan itself states. So for those reasons, Mr. Mayor, I will ask that Council support the plan. It pays respect to the development of the plan itself, but also to the application of it. And I think that's the compliment that we can provide to those that help build the plan, that we live to the spirit of the plan as we go through the development and approval of projects that, whether it be this plan or other plans around our city. And I hope that this is the same type of application, that we give meaning to the words that are in the documents that we pass at the time that we consider projects that come before us. Otherwise, this process of developing community plans, frankly, is an exercise in futility if, in fact, we don't go about that process. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Louie. That's all for speakers. I'll call a question on the motion as moved by Councillor Louie. All those in favour of the motion? And any opposed? Councillor Carr is opposed. Councillor Stevenson wasn't voting on that. Just make sure that's noted. And so the motion passes. And that's the end of that item. So we are on to 1 o'clock here. I am going to recommend that we move the other item of unfinished